Joined by the director of the 10-part docuseries on the Patriots Dynasty, the Dynasty, Matt Hamachek. Matt, how you doing today? Thanks for taking the time.
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Matt, it's been, making ripple effects through all of New England. Of course, anyone that's a football fan. But I want to start with what went into putting this documentary together. How many interviews? How long did they span? And how long did the edit take to break down all these testimonials, put them into storytelling mode, and finally make it all come together?
Yeah, so it's been 2.5 years, give or take, maybe a little bit more than that. And I'll never forget. We were really lucky because, as everybody's been able to see, we got to really talk to a lot of different people, and one of them was Ernie Adams, the director of football research. And in one of the first interviews I did with Ernie, I think it was one of the only audio-only interviews I did, he said something to me. He said, every team wants to go to the Super Bowl every year, but not every team is willing to do what it takes to get there. And I think when he said that to me, that was one of those sort of light bulb moments of, oh, I think this might be the thing that we can chase and we can try to figure out the answer to. Like, what does it take to get there? And what were these people willing to do? And in a way, the Patriots were kind of a conduit to have that discussion. And so that's a lot of what drove the questions I was asking in the interview chair. And, I got to talk to 70 plus players and coaches, front office execs, rivals, league officials. And then there was, 35,000 plus hours of archive to comb through, and, team of 50 plus people working around the clock at times to just sort of find the nuggets, because the Aaron Hernandez episode 6 was a perfect example of this, where, you can have people talking in an interview chair, and those interviews are incredibly powerful, not only in the final product, but also just to sit across from people. It's another thing when you find the footage in an archive of Chris Carter giving a speech at the rookie symposium for the NFL, and then and then Aaron Hernandez is up there asking a question. It's just, it's one of those things that, it makes the story you're telling so much more powerful to see something like that.
Yeah, I remember that particular scene as well. You see him hold the mic, and I remember watching and I'm thinking, no effing way did Aaron Hernandez actually ask that question. That episode is one of the most that stuck with me the most. What stuck with you from those conversations? Because from Deion Branch, that guy, you saw how much thought he put into his answers, but the impact all that happening had on him. What Brandon Lloyd had to say about it, which I didn't expect, and then Ernie Adams saying, we know there was something with him. Obviously, we didn't see that happening. But from those conversations with those players or personnel people, what stuck with you the most about Aaron Hernandez?
I think the thing immediately realized, and I think that Deion Branch is a perfect example of this. I think Robert Kraft too, Ernie as well, almost everybody we talked to all talked about a guy that they, yes, there's this tragedy that happened, but this is also a guy that people loved and that they cared about deeply. And you can see that in the face of people like Deion Branch when he's talking about this. Is not something that he, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but it's still something that you can tell really affects him emotionally, and something that he thinks about a lot. And I think our entire philosophy for the series was, this is the first time all of these people have ever participated in a single documentary before. Let's ask them the questions, and then let's get out of the way and let them do the talking, because these are the guys that were in the room, when all of the incredible successes happened. They were there for all of this, the 10 years when there was a Super Bowl drought, and then they were there for the final 3 Super Bowls, and this incredible dynasty sort of falling apart at the end.
Yeah, you see it for Deion Branch too, how much it wore on him, that he was the mentor for Aaron Hernandez. Belichick would go to him to talk to him, so you saw the effects on him in those convos. Talking about Bill Belichick, how intimidating was it to sit down with him? And it wasn't easy conversations you had to have. It was Spygate, it was Deflategate, it was Malcolm Butler. But how intimidating was it to sit down with him one-on-one and ask him questions?
It's interesting, because I think if I had grown up a fan of the Patriots, I think it probably would have been more intimidating for me. But I grew up a Packers fan. And so it's not to say that I didn't. I think Bill Belichick's the greatest coach of all time. And there's no question in my mind about that. not only because of his scheme and his sort of him as like a chess master, but also the culture that he created within the building, I think is responsible for a lot of that success. Because when you think about the time that he started coaching in 2000 to today, how much the world has changed with social media and distractions and all sorts of different things, and he kept things going for an incredibly long time. You know, I think I had two things in mind. One was that I felt it was important to ask Bill all the same questions that I'd asked everybody else. And so, you know, if I asked every other player and every other coach like Ernie or Scott about Spygate, I think it was only appropriate to ask Bill about them. But also I wanted to give him a chance to comment on things that people were saying, because he's the head of the organization from a football perspective, right? He's the guy, he was the one who was always out there doing the press conferences. And I think that was largely by design. I think that was part of what made the culture so effective, is that he was always the person that was out there answering questions, or not answering questions, and in a smart way that didn't give anybody bulletin board material. So I really thought it was important to ask him those same questions, but also to really give him a chance to comment on everything that, you know, people talked about.
Yeah, as someone that sat in countless Bill Belichick press conferences, I can ask a question. I'll have 40 other people in the room to hide behind if he doesn't answer. It was one-on-one. You know, the one that stuck with me, of course, he goes, Matt, we already spoke about this. And you followed up and said, I didn't ask you. But what did you ever notice a turn where he finally started to answer questions? Because it's hard to get any answer out of him, let alone these answers that you got from him.
Well, I think that, you know, with Bill, and I understand it because I think a lot of this goes back to the Bernie Kosar and situation in Cleveland that we detail in episode 1. That was an example of a time where, you know, when they let go of Bernie Kosar, Bill was very honest with the media. He said, you know, it came down to a diminishing set of, you know, his physical skills or something to that effect. And I think he was telling the truth, and I think he was being very forthright, but he got torched for it. And I think between that and probably, you know, Spygate and a couple other things, at a certain point, you sort of, I would imagine, though he didn't say this to me, but I can understand the philosophy of like, what good does it do to be, you know, forthright and honest with anybody at this point in time? And so I think that's the reason that, you know, you got a lot of those press conferences where he would just say, like, we're on to Cincinnati. But I think obviously he was also sending a message to everybody in the locker room too, who were probably looking at the TVs in the locker room and seeing that, you know, or, you know, around the stadium, and we're seeing that he was saying these things. And the thing that I noticed about Bill, though, is that there were definitely stories that he was interested in talking about. He was interested in talking about what it was like to coach up Matt Castle. He was in the 2008 season. He was interested in talking. I mean, he said, you know, coaching Tom made me a better coach. And Tom Brady says, I wouldn't be the player that I was without Bill Belichick. And so I think there were topics like that, like the stuff with Randy Moss when he called Randy in the club and Randy thought that there was a Bill Belichick impersonator on the other end of the line. You know, there were moments where he really opened up. One of them that I really, really liked is in episode 10 when we detail the Rams Super Bowl, the second one. And he, you know, you can see him light up when he talks about that kind of stuff, because I think, you know, at his heart, he's a football guy. And when we go to the football stuff, he's really interested in talking.
Yeah, that was certainly that Super Bowl where they win, shut down that Rams offense, was the Mona Lisa of his career. And also I think back to the aftermath of that 18-1 season. You see him at the ring ceremony, and this is a guy fresh off a huge win. He'll say, we're looking forward. But you guys had the footage of, remember what it took to go 16, 17, 18-0. Remember those seasons. Forget the 5-win seasons. I want you to remember what it took to do that, because that was something special. Someone that doesn't want to even celebrate wins was celebrating a letdown at the end, of course, but a special season as well. Was there a moment in those behind-the-scenes footage that stuck with you and had you sit back and go, wow, this is something we need to put in. This is something that's very special and I want to highlight?
I think there were just countless moments like that, whether it was, you know, whether it was the locker room after the divisional round game against the Texans in the 16 season, when it's such a scene just to like look at the footage, but they had, you know, they're advancing to, I don't know how many, how many AFC championships in a row. And, you know, in the background, you've got Rupert Murdoch and Les Moonves, the two heads of the networks that compete for for football games, both in the locker room. Rupert Murdoch's got a hoodie on in the background, and Bill Belichick is just tearing into the team like he always does, never letting anybody take any win for granted. And so there's moments like that, but it's also exactly like what you just said. The moment when he's talking to the team about how they should cherish that season. What I loved about that was, there's been countless books written about him, and every time they get to that sort of moment, they all say, and Bill Belichick walked in and said, let's put it behind us and move on. And here we found something that sort of countered the narrative, that he wasn't always that gruff guy who always just said, let's move on. And he did give these positive messages at times. And I always like when you're making a documentary that you can make people three-dimensional. They aren't just one type of person all the time, because we're all complicated and nuanced, and that's the best kind of storytelling.
Yeah, certainly a human side, more than I've ever seen in person from Bill Belichick. We saw in that one moment. And you brought him up, the magnitude of landing Ernie Adams, can't be put into words. That guy let you see his house, or what I think is his house. For all we know, it could have been a staged house. I'm not saying you do that in the doc,
but
his house, his car. But this is a guy that swore to secrecy his whole life. How did you land Ernie, and then also just to get that access, and really it speaks to the trust that you earned from him?
I don't think I have any great answer, because really what happened was I called him up and we just started talking, and then we did this one interview that was almost like a audio only interview where I just had like a recorder and a microphone. And I don't know, we just started talking, and we've kind of become friends now, which is a bizarre thing. And I just had dinner with him last week when I was up in Boston. Ernie is a fascinating person and a great student of the game. And, it's been just interesting to hear all of his stories. And someday somebody's going to get him on their network, and he has so much sort of storytelling left in him. So somebody's going to figure that out and be very lucky.
Yeah, certainly part of the brain trust that helped bring New England those 6 rings.
Yeah, no doubt.
And, I bet for you probably know this. You met up, you had dinner with him. He knew what you were going to order before you knew what you were going to order. That's the type of guy Ernie Adams is. When people finish up this 10-part documentary, what do you want them to walk away feeling and also learning and remembering about what they discovered about the Dynasty?
I think that Tom Brady in episode 10 sort of says it the best. He says, when he's talking about the journey, he says it was perfect and it doesn't need to be more than that. And now his interpretation of that may be different than mine, but my interpretation of it is that this is an incredible story. Yes, it's the unvarnished sort of telling of this story, which may be different than what people have seen in the past. It may include some of the things that fans of New England may not, want to relive. And of course may have skipped over some things that they wish that they could relive over again. But I think that the point here is that all of this, the greatness of all of these people, some of their foibles, some of the lower points, it's all part of it, and it was perfect, and it doesn't need to be more than that. And to me, that's the takeaway that I have is it's something to be cherished, but it's also something that, in order to cherish it, you have to tell it the right way. And in my mind, the right way is sort of the warts and all version of the story.
Yeah, those first 3 Super Bowls, Tom Brady doesn't have it without Bill Belichick, because the defense led them. The last 3, it was truly a full team effort. And we heard Tom Brady say, we heard Bill Belichick say, Robert Kraft, of course, recognized that the respect they had for each other, how important they were. It did a great job of capturing what brought it to an end. And it was simply, it seemed like Tom Brady wanted respect. He wanted to have that earned of everything he's done for the franchise. But then you also see him talking about at the end where they get away from each other, they get to space. It was like a married couple, and they had appreciation for each other at the end. Is there anything when you look back on those conversations with Tom Brady or Bill Belichick that had you discover something, how they truly feel about one another and the respect they have for each other?
I think that, when Tom Brady says the words, I wouldn't be the player that I am today without Bill Belichick. I have talked to football coaches on the staff and elsewhere who saw that line in one of the first couple episodes and said, there is literally no better compliment a player can give to a coach than saying those words. And so I think that speaks volume. And I think when Bill Belichick said the same thing about Tom, that also speaks volumes. And so, look, a lot of the documentary, I think, is an examination of what it was like to be in the room, not what people are thinking about now, having been away from it for a number of years, or being apart from each other for a number of years. I think the thing that interested me was to say, let's put the audience in the room and let them understand what it was like and why the things happened that they happened. Because, the one thing that anybody knows about the Patriots, even a non-fan like me, growing up, is that they always kept you at arm's length. And so you didn't get to go inside those places. The most that you sometimes got out of them was the "we're on to Cincinnati" lines at the press conferences. So I felt like the interesting story there is, if you're trying to understand what does it take to get to the top, what does it take to get to that level of greatness, is okay, instead of doing this academic approach to it, let's just put people in the rooms and ask the people who were there and just say, what was it like, and let them answer the questions.
Love that, Matt. Great job on this documentary. You can catch the Dynasty 10-part documentary on Apple TV+. Matt Hamachek, the director of this one, gives us a peel behind the curtain on what brought 6 championship rings to New England, and then also what brought it to an end. Matt, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate you taking it. Great job on this documentary.
Thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate it. Thanks.
PNC Bank, rooted in communities big and small.